In my past life, my husband was one of the first to get rich after the economy opened up. I always felt that with just a grade school education, I was marrying up. So I devoted myself to being a good wife and mother, taking care of him and his parents. When he let his sister-in-law, Linda, live in our house, I didn't say a word. When he asked me to give her my job opportunity, I agreed to that too. All those years of hard work and swallowing my feelings took their toll, and I got sick. But it wasn't until I was on my deathbed, barely breathing, that I finally understood. Everyone was just waiting for me to die so Linda could take my place, including the 2 children I had worked my fingers to the bone to raise. Fine. If that's what they wanted, then this time, I'd give it to them. When I saw the year 1980 printed boldly on the wall calendar, I finally believed it. I had been reborn. Remembering what day it was, I wiped the tears from my face. The first thing I did was run out into the yard to stop my friend May. I told her not to return that train ticket. Bella, are you sure you want to go south to find work? You'll be gone for a whole year, you know. You definitely won't be back in the middle of it. I nodded forcefully. I'm sure. May still had her doubts. But your 2 kids are only 7. Didn't you say you couldn't bear to leave them? And your in-laws. You said they weren't in good health and needed you to take care of them. Besides, will your husband even agree to it? My throat tightened at the mention of Ethan. I knew exactly how exceptional he was. Everyone told me to hold on to him tight and never let go. In my last life, that's exactly what I did. And look where it got me. So now, looking at May, I nodded again with determination. May smiled, relieved. It's great that you've thought it through. Honestly, I've always thought you were hardworking, capable, and smart. If you weren't stuck at home, you could have really made something of yourself. I nodded, smiling through my tears. Clutching that train ticket south, my heart pounded for a long, long time. In 8 more days, I could finally leave. In my past life, my childhood neighbor, May, had taken a trip down south. When she came back, she told me all about how open and developed it was there, and how she wanted to go and try her luck. I was tempted too. So May asked a friend to stand in line and buy 2 train tickets for us. But when I got home and just mentioned May's idea, my in-laws cut me off with cold faces. What's a woman doing running all over the place? That's ridiculous. Bella, don't you dare learn from that kind of improper woman. A woman's place is in the home. Taking care of her husband, her children, and her in-laws is enough. That's what makes a good woman. So I never got to say what I wanted to say. When May came to give me the ticket, I had to refuse. Luckily this time it wasn't too late. When I got home, my twin sons were in the yard playing in the dirt. Seeing me, they didn't even bother to call me mom. They just whined about being hungry and told me to hurry up and make dinner. Hearing her precious grandsons cry out in hunger, my mother-in-law rushed out of the house. Bella, where have you been? It's this late and you haven't started cooking? Are you trying to starve my darling grandsons? But I didn't obey as I usually did. I don't feel well. I'm going to go lie down for a bit. With that, I shut my bedroom door, not wanting to see the shocked look on my mother-in-law's face. In my previous life, I knew I wasn't good enough for the educated Ethan. I only got to marry him because of an old arranged marriage from our childhood. Ethan had a sharp mind, and as soon as the economy opened up, he seized the opportunity. He became one of the first people to make a fortune. The neighbors all envied me for marrying such a good man. My in-laws always said I was lucky, that I should be content and grateful. And in my past life I was. I worked tirelessly without complaint. In the He family I was a wife, a mother, and a daughter-in-law. But I was also the maid, serving the entire family. Yet I hardly ever enjoyed the money Ethan earned in those early years. All the money and convenience that came from Ethan's success went to his late brother's wife, Linda. Ethan's younger brother had passed away a few years ago, leaving behind Linda and their son. Linda was the darling of the family. My 2 sons adored her. My in-laws adored her. Even my own husband, Ethan, adored her. I gritted my teeth and accepted it all. I continued to take care of them just the same. I never imagined that when I was sick in bed, my own sons, already in college, would persuade me to give up treatment. Mom, just let go. Even if you get better, you'll only live for another 2 years. Dad and Aunt Linda have held back for you their whole lives. Just let them be happy." I looked at them from behind my oxygen mask, silent tears streaming down my face. These were the sons I had raised with my own 2 hands. I had poured my entire being into them, and now they just wanted me to die sooner. They had probably forgotten how their respected father had taken every last penny from the house to start his business. They were starving, crying with hunger. It was me who went around begging, swallowing my pride to borrow grain to keep them alive. When they were sick, it was me who stayed up day and night to care for them. The school in our county wasn't good. I begged Ethan for so long, pleaded with him to take the kids to the city for their education. But he refused. I had no choice but to take the children and beg an old teacher from our hometown to help get them into a city school. They had forgotten it all. All they remembered was that their father, who had been absent for their entire childhood, was now very rich. It was in this bitter regret that I closed my eyes for the last time. Thank God, I was given another chance. When I came out of the bedroom, dinner was already on the table. A young woman, dressed fashionably and beautifully, came out of the kitchen. It was Linda. She ignored me, placed a plate of stewed green beans on the table, and took off her apron. Just then Ethan came home. Linda immediately broke into a smile. "You're back, big brother." My mother-in-law came out of her room too. After seeing me, she snorted. "So you know to come out when it's time to eat," she said sarcastically. "How did you get so lazy, faking sick just to get out of making dinner?" Ethan looked at me, his brow furrowed. I didn't say a word and sat down. Linda smiled, trying to smooth things over. "It's okay, I don't mind cooking." But my mother-in-law wouldn't let it go. "Bella, just look at Linda. She's educated and reasonable, not like you, petty, greedy, and lazy." I stared straight ahead and served myself a bowl of rice. "You're right. I'm not as lucky as my sister-in-law. She married a good husband, so she doesn't have to lift a finger." My words made everyone at the table freeze. Ethan looked at me, his gaze dark. It was true, wasn't it? We were both daughters-in-law of the He family. Linda didn't have to do a thing after she got married. But I had to take care of the old and the young, and I was responsible for all the family's meals. And no one appreciated my efforts. If that was the case, why should I keep making myself miserable? When my mother-in-law saw me talk back, she exploded. She was about to slam her hand on the table and yell, but Ethan stopped her. Ethan was the top dog in this house, even his mother watched his moods. Seeing him step in, she had no choice but to swallow her anger. The family continued to eat. My 2 sons and Linda's son sensed the tense atmosphere and ate quietly. After dinner, I naturally didn't do the dishes. I just went back to my room after I finished eating. I didn't expect Ethan to follow me in. He stared at me for a long time, then finally sighed in resignation. "I know you've been wronged all these years. Once I make enough money, you'll be able to live a comfortable life." I looked at his young face. There was no denying that Ethan was handsome and charming. He was tall and well-built. Time had been kind to him. Even a decade later, he would still be a distinguished middle-aged man. Not like me, worn out from years of hard labor and never bothering to dress up. I already looked haggard by the time I reached middle age. I took a deep breath and looked at him steadily. "You've made a lot of money now. If you gave me an extra $200 a month, I could live a good life right now." Ethan's expression changed. "I already told you, that money is for something important. I can't spend it yet." "Important? You mean for buying Linda a wool coat?" I looked at him with a cold smile. A few days ago, Linda had gotten a new red wool coat. She deliberately paraded it in front of me several times before accidentally letting it slip that Ethan had bought it for her. That coat cost enough to cover the family's food expenses for 2 months. Realizing I knew, Ethan guiltily touched his nose but remained stubborn. "Bella, don't compare yourself to her. Her husband died. We should take care of her. You're the older sister-in-law, like a mother to her. Just treat her like a child." His shameless words made me laugh. "A child? She's already a mother herself, and you want me to treat her like my child? Ethan, have you ever been this good to your actual children?" My 2 sons ate scraps with me at home. We rarely had meat, yet he had the money to buy clothes for Linda. It was as if I'd hit a nerve. His voice rose. "Bella, don't be unreasonable. A knock came from outside the door. Ethan suppressed his anger and went to open the door. It was Linda. She stood timidly outside. Brother, sister, were you two fighting? Seeing Ethan's dark expression, she quickly added, is it about who makes dinner? Brother, if sister doesn't want to cook, I can do it from now on. Please don't fight over this. Before Ethan could speak, I cut in. Great. From now on you're cooking. Linda's face fell. She seemed shocked that I would actually agree, especially right in front of Ethan. After all, I had always been the virtuous, accommodating wife. Ignoring her shock, I pushed past her and went into the yard to heat up water to wash. I left the two of them to it. The next morning, I woke up a little late. Ethan was already gone. I found the train ticket I had hidden. I couldn't help but touch it lovingly, staring at the date printed on it. 7 more days, and I would be on my way south. I carefully put it away again. When I walked out of my room, I was surprised to see a few hot buns and a bowl of millet porridge on the table. Ethan came out of the kitchen and smiled at me. Bella, hurry and wash up. Breakfast is ready. Mom already took the kids to school. I looked at him, puzzled. He had never been this attentive before. But who was I to argue with food? I sat down and ate peacefully. Ethan couldn't find a chance to speak until I was finished and about to leave. Bella, he finally said, there's something I want to discuss with you. Looking at his face, I suddenly had a guess. Sure enough, his next sentence was about the apartment. The new apartment I bought in the city. I think we should let Linda and her son live there. Although he phrased it as a suggestion, I knew he had already made up his mind. It was the same in my past life. He said it wasn't easy for Linda as a single mother. The courtyard house in the county was too small for all of us to be squeezed together. He also said the conditions at Linda's dorm were bad. Her son couldn't sleep well, and she couldn't cook there, so they had to come back to the old house for meals. If Linda and her son rented a place on their own, a 1-story house wouldn't be very safe. On and on he went, all boiling down to the fact that the apartment was more suitable for them. Ethan said he would earn more money soon, and buy a better house for me and our sons. In my past life, I had actually disagreed with Ethan for the first time. First, I was concerned that the kids were already in the 1st grade, but the education in the county was poor. I hadn't had much schooling myself, so I desperately wanted my children to get a good education. I hoped we could move to the city soon so the kids could go to a city school. Second, the security in the county really was bad. Ethan was away most of the time, leaving me with the old and the young. As a young woman, I was often terrified living there. Sometimes, drunks would knock on our door in the middle of the night. I would often be too scared to sleep, clutching a hammer and hiding behind the door all night. When I heard Ethan had bought a place in the city and was going to move us all there, I was overjoyed for a long time. So, when he suddenly said he wanted to give it to his sister-in-law, I objected. But Ethan flew into a rage. The argument ended with him shouting, I earned the money, I bought the house, and I'll say who gets to live in it. His words broke my heart, but my own sense of inferiority left me speechless. If only I had the chance, I wanted so badly to go out and earn my own money. Only when you earn it yourself can you spend it with peace of mind, without having to depend on anyone else. Now Ethan was using the same lines, but I no longer felt the same agitation. I looked at him calmly and repeated all the reasons I had given in my past life. Naturally, he was impatient. Bella, you're the senior sister-in-law. Why do you have to fight with her over this? And you're using the kids as an excuse. I scoffed. Fight. Have you ever heard of a woman fighting her sister-in-law for her own husband? What do you think this is, some kind of harem? Ethan's face changed, and he shot up from his seat. Bella, watch your words. What do you mean fighting for a husband? I'm her brother-in-law. What's wrong with taking care of her? I watched him lose his cool, amused. What are you so worked up about? I didn't say I disagreed. He was so surprised by my sudden agreement that he was momentarily at a loss for words. I ignored him, got up, and prepared to leave. He blocked my way and asked where I was going. I pushed him aside. None of your business. Just focus your energy on taking care of your dear sister-in-law. You. Ignoring his fury, I grabbed the shiny new bicycle and left. When Ethan married me, he didn't spend a dime. My in-laws said that since my parents were gone, There was no need for all that nonsense about a bride price or dowry. They said those things were for strangers, and once I married in, I'd be their own daughter. As an orphan, I had no one to prepare a dowry for me. So before I married into the He family, I sold the livestock from my old home, and with the money, I had a pair of gold earrings and a ring made. That was everything I owned. 6 months later, Ethan's business ran into trouble. Without a second thought, I sold the gold jewelry I had never even brought myself to wear and gave him the money to get through the emergency. Now that I was planning to go south, I needed some cash. So I sold the jewelry again. It wasn't much, but if I couldn't find a job right away in the south, it would be enough to tide me over. By the time I got home, it was almost noon. As soon as I walked in, I saw Linda sitting in the house with red-rimmed eyes. My mother-in-law saw me and slammed her hand on the table in anger. "You finally decided to come back. If you hadn't, I would have called the police to arrest you. They say you can guard against thieves day and night, but you can't guard against one in your own family. Bella, how could you steal from your own home?" Linda quickly went to comfort my mother-in-law, then wiped her tears and said to me, "Sister-in-law, if you have a problem with me, you can just say it. Why do you have to do this to me?" Before I could say anything, Ethan happened to come back. Linda started sobbing again. Ethan frowned. "What's going on? What's going on? Ask your wife. See what she's done." My father-in-law banged his cane on the floor, his face red with anger. Ethan looked at me with a flash of impatience. Without even asking, he had already decided I was guilty. He assumed I was still throwing a tantrum about giving the apartment to Linda. "Bella, how long are you going to drag this out over the apartment?" At the mention of the apartment, Linda shot a quick glance at me. After listening to the He family's nonsense for a while, I finally understood. It turned out today's drama was all because I had ridden that shiny new bicycle. That bike was the first big purchase Ethan made for the family after he started making money. It was different from the standard heavy, black bikes. It was smaller and more delicate. It was also a bright, eye-catching red, clearly more suited for a woman. He had called it a gift for me. The neighbors all said I had married a good husband. But after he brought it home, I never once rode it. Because Linda worked in a factory cafeteria, about a 10-minute walk away. Not that far. But Linda always acted so fragile. Every time she walked back, she would be out of breath for a long time before she could recover. So, after the bike was bought, Ethan decided to let her ride it. Over time, she had come to think of the bicycle as her own, and no one else could touch it. So today, when she had a half day off and went to visit a friend, she came back at noon ready to go to work only to find the bike missing. When a neighbor told her I had taken it, her eyes instantly turned red. She had to walk to work, feeling utterly wronged. The moment she got off work and saw my mother-in-law, she burst into tears. After realizing the reason for all this, I laughed. "Linda, is that bike yours?" Linda was taken aback and instinctively shook her head, but then quickly added, "But I've always been the one riding it, and I need it for work." "You deliberately took it, which just means you have a problem with me." I glanced at Ethan, who was about to speak, and cut him off. "My husband bought that bicycle. Don't I even have the right to ride it once?" Ethan's words were caught in his throat. I looked at him and continued calmly, "Ethan, you tell me, was this bicycle bought for Linda? If it was, I'll never touch it again." Ethan pressed his lips together, a flicker of something in his eyes. Perhaps he too remembered what he had said when he first brought the bicycle home. "Bella, you've suffered these past few years with me. This is for you. From now on, whatever other people have, I'll buy for you too." Ethan looked at my face and finally sighed. He turned to Linda and his mother. "The bike was originally bought for Bella. It's no big deal if she rides it once." My mother-in-law never went against her son, so after hearing that, she could only huff in displeasure. But the expression on Linda's face was priceless. She probably never thought the matter would be dropped just like that. She must have thought I was going to get a good scolding from Ethan. I looked at the kitchen, which was completely untouched, and said with a half smile, "Yesterday, my dear sister-in-law said she would take care of all the cooking from now on. Does that still count?" Linda hesitated. She looked at my mother-in-law, then at Ethan, and finally had to nod reluctantly. "Of course. I went back to my room and put away the money from selling my gold jewelry. Just as I secured it, Ethan came into the room. I ignored him, folding clothes with my back to him. But then he suddenly wrapped his arms around me from behind. Bella! I instinctively broke free and moved far away from him, watching him warily. He looked awkward and pressed his lips together in displeasure. In the past, I loved his occasional moments of affection. Every time, even if he just held my hand, my heart would race and my face would flush. I was as shy as a new bride. This was the first time I had ever avoided him like the plague. He was confused. Bella, what's been going on with you lately? You're so secretive, and you're never home. It's nothing. I refused to look at the perplexed expression on his handsome face, and pushed the door open to leave. At the dinner table, Linda had regained her composure. She even proactively served me a bowl of porridge. She seemed to be in a very good mood. I had already noticed. 2 small boxes were packed and ready in Linda and her son's bedroom. They were preparing to move. Linda's job at the cafeteria came with a dorm room, but after living there for a while, they said the conditions were poor and moved back. But the old house wasn't big, and their bedroom was also very small. Now that they were about to move into an apartment in the city, of course she was happy. In my past life, after they moved to the city, her son also transferred to a school there. I was very envious. Because I didn't have the chance to study, I placed great importance on my son's education. Although my 2 boys resented my strictness, I still insisted that they take their studies seriously. That was why I later went to great lengths, asking for favors everywhere, to get them into a school in the city too. But at this moment, after all the dishes were served, I suddenly spoke up. Hank, we can't move into the city apartment. Did you know that? My sudden announcement made the dinner table fall silent. Ethan's face was grim. Why are you telling the kids this? The kids have been looking forward to it for a long time. Now that they can't go, they have a right to know. I met his displeased gaze calmly. In my past life, the children's faces were filled with disappointment when they couldn't move to the city. I was afraid they would resent Ethan, so I even helped him explain. This time I wouldn't meddle. Since his relationship with his sons was so good, he could explain it to them himself. I looked at Henry and Hank. It's because your father is giving the apartment to Aunt Linda and their family. Oh, and Teddy will be transferring to a school in the city, but you 2 won't have the chance to go. As soon as the 2 boys heard this, they were instantly unhappy and looked like they were about to throw a fit. Linda's face turned pale, and she soon started to cry softly. Usually, whenever she got the better end of a deal, she would play the martyr, saying things like "never mind, I don't want it," and wait for me to give in. Perhaps because my recent changes had worried her, this time she didn't dare say, "Never mind, I don't want it." She just let the 2 kids make a scene, not saying a word, only shedding silent tears. She looked as if she had suffered a great injustice. Ethan was so angry he nearly threw his chopsticks down. You 2 shut up. It's not easy for your aunt to raise Teddy by herself. What have I told you? You have to let Teddy have his way. I ignored the drama and calmly ate my food. My 2 sons were willing to let their own mother die early just to please their father and aunt. From now on, I didn't need to worry about them anymore. I had told them the truth. If they lost the chance to study in the city in the future, they would know exactly who to thank. However, the 2 boys were easier to comfort than I had imagined. Or maybe it was because they always liked Linda anyway. So as soon as she cried, the 2 kids became obedient. Or maybe Ethan had successfully persuaded them with reason and emotion. They even came to blame me. Henry said, "Mom, are you trying to cause trouble between us and Aunt Linda?" Hank said, "Aunt Linda isn't well. It's fine for them to have the apartment." Mom, you shouldn't be so petty. I looked at them and chuckled. Just remember what you said today. Mom tried to fight for you, but sadly, I couldn't get the house, and I couldn't get you into a city school. You gave it all up willingly. The 2 boys were not happy to hear that. Mom, you don't understand anything. We're not talking to you anymore. We're going to go play with Aunt Linda. I no longer felt hurt by these 2 children. In my past life, I had done everything for them, given them my all. In this life, I would not continue. I took out the train ticket again and couldn't help but look at it. Soon. The day before I left, Ethan also packed his bags. He was going on another business trip to source goods. This time, as usual, he would likely be gone for more than half a year. Normally, I would have packed everything for him in advance. This time, I didn't touch a thing. And for once, he didn't ask, just quietly packed his things himself. He even took the initiative to boil a kettle of hot water for me. Seeing that I was about to go out again, he suddenly said, "Bella, there's something I want to discuss with you." I stopped in my tracks, suddenly remembering something. No wonder he was being so unusually attentive today. Sure enough, his next sentence was, "Mr. Zhang found a job for you in the city, right? I've been thinking, and I don't think it's a good fit for you." Ethan had a whole list of reasons. For instance, since I lived in the county now, it would be inconvenient to get to the city. The bus from our old house to the city only ran twice a day, early in the morning and late at night. And if I took the job, I wouldn't be able to take care of the family. He said earnestly, "This family needs you. I can earn money, so you don't need to go out and suffer like that." I laughed and looked at him. "What does your earning money have to do with me? Have you ever given me any of it?" Ethan was at a loss for words, his expression awkward. But he quickly recovered. "On this business trip, if everything goes well, I should make a profit of $10,000. This time, I'll give all the money to you. You can decide how to spend it." Seeing that I was unmoved, he made another promise. "Even if you spend it all on yourself, on fancy shoes and wool coats, I won't say a word." I sneered inwardly. If this had been my previous life, hearing him make such a promise would have probably made me cry with gratitude, willing to be a workhorse for his family forever. But having already died once, how could I possibly be fooled by him again? But I looked away from him. "All right, then I need to draft an agreement, and you have to sign it." Ethan was surprised and a little unhappy with my lack of trust. But he had already made the offer, so he had to agree. "If that's what it takes to make you believe me, then fine, I'll sign." I immediately went back to the room and found a piece of letter paper to write on. A short while later, I came out with 2 sheets of paper, flipped to the second page and held it out. "Sign it." Without even looking, Ethan picked up the pen and signed his name. "Are you satisfied now?" He saw me seemingly let out a sigh of relief, and his tone relaxed. I carefully put the papers away as Ethan said, "Go talk to Mr. Zhang about the job." I paused and looked at him steadily. "You said the job isn't suitable for me. So who is it suitable for?" Ethan avoided my gaze and cleared his throat. "I was thinking, since you're not taking it, it would be a waste of an opportunity. Why not give it to Linda? It's perfect since she's moved to the city." After he finished, he looked at me nervously, probably afraid I would get angry and go back on my word. But I was unusually calm. "I'll go talk to Mr. Zhang and tell him I'm not taking the job. But likewise, I wouldn't let Linda get this lucky break either." A smile spread across Ethan's face, and he tried to hug me. "Bella, marrying such a sensible woman is my good fortune." I was so disgusted I almost threw up. I dodged his embrace and walked outside. There weren't many places to get copies made back then, so I had to go to several spots before I found one. When I came out of the shop, I had 2 copies of a divorce agreement in my hand. Just moments ago, I had tricked Ethan into signing this very document. Getting a divorce was easy in those days. With this signed agreement, all I needed was an official stamp from the relevant department, and the divorce would be final. Next, I went to Mr. Zhang's house. Mr. Zhang was an old neighbor from my village who had later moved to the city to work. Now that he was older, he had returned to the county to retire. He had practically watched me grow up. Knowing my unfortunate past, he always thought of me when something good came up. Like the factory job. This was before the wave of layoffs, so a factory job was a golden ticket. It was a one-in, one-out situation, and many people couldn't get in even if they wanted to. When a spot opened up, Mr. Zhang immediately thought of me. But in my past life, I had let him down. After a little persuasion from Ethan, I gave up and even recommended Linda. This time, since I was already planning to go south, I naturally wouldn't take the job. But I wouldn't let Linda benefit from it either. I politely declined the job offer from Mr. Zhang and recommended someone else. I didn't know how long I would be gone, so I stayed and chatted with Mr. Zhang for a long while before heading home. By the time I got back, Ethan was already gone. Just like every other time he left. But this time was different. He had left me a letter. The letter was filled with heartfelt emotion. He said he knew I cared about Linda, but he promised that he had no ulterior motives towards her. He was just taking care of her and her son on behalf of his deceased brother, hoping his brother could rest in peace. He also promised that he would work hard to provide a good life for me. I read it with a blank expression and tossed it aside. I was long immune to such empty gestures. On my last night, I went to my son's room. The moment they saw me come in, their faces fell, and they quickly hid what they were holding. But I had already seen it. It was a birthday card. Linda's birthday was coming up. My two sons had never given me anything, but they never missed one of Linda's birthdays. I stared at them, and then a smile of release spread across my face. My bond with them as a mother had been exhausted in my previous life. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Early in the morning, I dragged out the luggage I had packed in advance. After placing the copied divorce agreement on the table, I left the He family home that had trapped me for most of my life. When I got to the train station, May was already there. She was happy to see me and waved. I was so afraid you wouldn't come. How could I not? When it was time, we boarded the train heading south. I didn't know that after I left, a storm was brewing back at the He house. First, Linda, who had already moved to the city, rode the bicycle back to the old house early in the morning. She was crying, saying the factory job was gone. She already knew from Ethan that I had given up the position, so she had assumed the spot was hers, and had even bragged to her neighbors. But then, a neighbor told her the opening at the factory had already been filled. She even knew the person who got it, a neighbor from right here in the old courtyard. That's when Linda rushed back in a rage. She was complaining to my mother-in-law, saying I'd rather give the job to an outsider than help my own family, when they finally realized I wasn't home. Finally, in my room, they found the copy of the divorce agreement and the short note I left behind. I have decided to divorce Ethan. Don't look for me. My mother-in-law saw it, collapsed to the floor, and started wailing and slapping her thighs, cursing me for being heartless. A secret smile of delight crept across Linda's face. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore. By then, I had already arrived in Guangzhou. The open and vibrant spirit of Guangzhou was completely different from my hometown. People here dressed in a stylish and modern way. There were also plenty of job opportunities. Unlike back home, where you had to fight for a factory position, here small factories were everywhere. We had just gotten off the train when someone started watching us. Ladies, you must be new to Guangzhou. Here to work? Found a job yet? My factory happens to be short-staffed. You both look like honest people. Why don't you come work for me? The person was an older woman with a very friendly smile. Her string of questions hit all the right notes for us. May was about to answer when I quietly tugged on her hand and said to the woman, "No, we're here to visit relatives." Then I quickly pulled May away. After we were a safe distance away, May asked Bella, "Why did we just leave? Weren't we looking for a job?" I explained. That woman was watching us for a long time. Our clothes and luggage clearly mark us as outsiders, which means we're easy targets. Most importantly, while there are a lot of factories here, there aren't so many that they're just pulling people off the street to work. Most factories still required an interview before hiring. And I seem to recall hearing something about this. Around this time in Guangzhou, there were gangs that specifically targeted people from out of town. They preyed on the fact that many people came from small places, were inexperienced, and were only focused on finding work to earn money. Plus, people were generally more trusting back then. Not like later on, when everyone was battle-hardened and knew all the common scams. Right now, most people wouldn't overthink it, so they were easy to trick. Some were lured into sweatshops, working day and night. Some were sold into brothels. Some were even taken to the deep mountains and sold to old widowers. Since May and I were new here, it was better to be cautious. May nodded in agreement after hearing my explanation. "Bella, you really know more about these things." We were about to leave the station when we saw the same woman stop a young man. The woman had changed her tune. "Hey there, son. You're not here to work, are you? Here for school?" The young man looked clean-cut and had fair skin. He wore glasses and had a scholarly air about him. He definitely didn't look like a manual laborer. When the young man nodded, The woman laughed heartily. I could tell you were a student. Which university are you going to? The young man seemed a bit shy, but still answered politely, the University of Technology. Oh, what a coincidence. My son goes there too. He's a freshman in the chemistry department. I was just on my way to see him. You can ride in my car, I'll give you a lift. The young man was taken aback by her enthusiasm and quickly said no. Thank you, ma'am, but that's okay. I can get there myself. Don't be shy with me. We were meant to cross paths. The woman was big and strong, and she managed to drag him a few steps. I saw the whole thing. I didn't want to meddle in a place where I didn't know anyone. But that boy was a college student, with a bright future ahead of him. If he was really sold to a sweatshop, he'd be trapped for life, his future ruined. After a moment's hesitation, I pulled May back with me. I stepped in front of the woman and said to the boy, Alex, what took you so long? The car is here. Then I motioned for him to follow me. The boy paused for a second, then quickly pulled his arm free and dragged his luggage over to my side. I subtly tugged on the corner of his shirt, and the three of us quickly left the train station. I was afraid the woman might have accomplices nearby. We walked a long way before I finally breathed a sigh of relief. The young man followed us for a while, panting and out of breath, but he didn't forget to thank us. Thank you so much. Otherwise, I really wouldn't have been able to get away from that woman. He said he eventually realized something was wrong. The woman was overly enthusiastic. But she had a death grip on his arm, and since he wasn't very strong, he couldn't break free. His family had warned him to be careful of traffickers, but he hadn't made the connection at first. I asked him curiously, why did you trust me so easily? Weren't you afraid I was part of another group of traffickers? The way he had followed me so naturally had surprised me too. The young man smiled, his bright eyes sparkling. The moment I saw you, I knew you were a good person. The way you looked at me was full of worry, the same way my family looks at me. His innocence made me smile. You should still be more careful in the future. Such a naive young man. Thinking about how he had realized something was wrong but didn't call for help, I couldn't help but advise him, if you ever encounter something like this again, remember to shout for help. Don't be embarrassed. The young man smiled sheepishly and nodded, his cheeks flushing. We exchanged names. It turned out his name was Jeremy, and he was a freshman in the history department at the University of Technology. After that, we went our separate ways. The days flew by. May and I had been in Guangzhou for half a year. During this time, we had been working at a clothing factory. We saved some money and got to know the city a little better. At the end of the year, May decided to go home. When she learned I wasn't planning on going back, she sighed. That's fine. Just take care of yourself. I'll see you after the new year. After seeing May off, I returned to the place I was temporarily renting. The factory was closed for the holiday, so I couldn't stay in the dorm anymore. In my free time, I started working on my own business plan. I collected discarded fabric scraps from the clothing factory, bought a sewing machine, and started making canvas and tote bags. The economy was booming at the time, and foreign brands were starting to enter the market. Leather bags were very popular. But for younger people with less money, the selection of bags was very limited. So I decided to start my business with bags. And with the free fabric scraps from the factory, I basically didn't need to invest any money, just some time to get started. With that thought, I was filled with even more motivation. Outside the university campus, a few young women crowded around me. Ma'am, here's 50 cents. Ma'am, this one's mine. Take my money first. I smiled calmly. Don't worry, one at a time. In no time, the 20 bags I had brought were all sold out. The size of the canvas and tote bags was perfect for students to use for school. So when I first showed them, they were immediately interested. There were plenty of students who liked to spend money. They were the most open to new things, and they tended to follow trends. That's why I chose them as my target customers. After collecting the money, I was ready to leave. Sister Bella. I heard someone call my name and turned around. Looking at the boy running towards me, it took me a moment to remember. It was Jeremy, the young man I had met at the train station when I first arrived in Guangzhou. It had been 6 months, and he didn't look as frail as before. It really is you, Sister Bella. I almost didn't recognize you. I glanced down at my clothes and smiled silently. It was true, I had changed a lot in the past 6 months. The biggest change was probably that the dead, lifeless feeling was gone. Jeremy suddenly turned his head and said, "Uncle, this is the sister I told you about, the one who saved me." Curious, I looked behind him. A man was slowly approaching. The man was tall with sharp, cool features. He had the refined air of a scholar, yet he also gave off an inexplicable sense of noble aloofness. After introductions, I learned that Jeremy's uncle was named Julian. He had returned from studying abroad and was a highly paid associate professor at the University of Technology. When Jeremy found his uncle, he told him what had happened. It was only then that he realized he had narrowly escaped being abducted, and he was terrified. They had wanted to thank me, but they didn't have my contact information, which they regretted. "Since we've run into each other today, let us treat you to a meal." Jeremy was very enthusiastic, but I felt a little awkward. Julian looked so unapproachable that it was intimidating. So I made up an excuse and declined. But I couldn't say no to Jeremy, so I ended up giving them my temporary address. When Jeremy learned I was selling cloth bags, he even volunteered to help me promote them. The whole time, Julian stood by with a faint smile, listening to us talk. I smiled and thanked Jeremy, then said, "Well, I should get going." I said goodbye to him, and as I was leaving, my eyes met Julian's. He gave me a slight nod. I managed a small smile and quickly looked away. One day, after making a delivery to the campus, I came back to find Ethan waiting for me. He was also surprised to see me, then frowned and walked over. "What are you doing here?" He looked me over for a moment, and then it seemed to dawn on him. "You actually went out to work? This is ridiculous." It was only then that I learned what had happened. After I left the divorce papers, my mother-in-law had managed to get in touch with Ethan. She was so angry and anxious that she couldn't speak clearly. She just said I had left a note and run off. He was busy with his business at the time and didn't listen carefully. He just thought I was throwing a tantrum and had run away from home, saying I was going to find work. He thought I had, at most, gone back to the countryside for a while, or maybe found a job in the city. He never imagined I would have come all the way to Guangzhou. He looked at me helplessly and sighed. "Well, as long as you're okay. Think of these past 6 months as a little vacation. I'm heading back the day after tomorrow. You're coming with me." He still thought I was just being difficult. He reached for my hand. "You're getting more and more temperamental. Do you know how dangerous it is out here? Weren't you afraid something would happen?" I coldly dodged his hand. Ethan finally noticed the cold expression I'd had on my face from the very beginning. We stared at each other in silence. Ethan was the first to back down, his voice coaxing. "I made a lot of money this time. Just like we agreed, you can be in charge of it all. Whatever you want to buy, we can go buy it right now. Guangzhou is a bustling city. There are lots of things here that we don't have back home." He thought that since he had already compromised so much, I would surely take the olive branch. After all, whenever we argued before, I was always the one to back down first. But he was wrong. This time, I had no intention of backing down. I wanted to stand on higher ground. I shook my head. "No need. I can earn my own money. I can buy whatever I want without having to ask anyone. We're husband and wife. How can you call it asking?" I couldn't help but scoff. What else would it be? I'm not Linda. I never get anything from you unless I ask. Ethan's expression was complicated. "You're still upset about Linda? I already explained everything in the letter. There's nothing going on between us." At the mention of the letter, I looked straight at him. "What I had you sign before you left wasn't a promise. It was a divorce agreement." "Ethan, we're already divorced." Ethan couldn't believe it. He refused to accept that I would actually divorce him. He practically lost his composure as he questioned me. "Why? I admit, I haven't been home much these past few years because of my business, and you've had to put up with a lot. But wasn't I doing it all for our family?" I corrected him precisely. "To be accurate, you were doing it for yourself and for Linda. Don't try to pin that on me. After all, I hadn't seen any of the benefits." My words made him laugh bitterly. "Linda, always Linda. Why do you always bring her up? She's my sister-in-law. That will never change." Ethan, at the end of the day, in this era of scarcity where every family is poor, where the money goes, the love goes. The money wasn't with me, so naturally, the love wasn't with me either. Ethan was stunned. I had no intention of saying anything more to him and turned to leave. He grabbed me. Bella, no matter what, we were married. We can't just get divorced like this. Come back with me first. I didn't want to and tried to pull away. As we struggled, a voice suddenly called out from a distance. Let go of Sister Bella. I saw Jeremy running over, trying to pry Ethan's hand off my wrist. But Jeremy was still too frail to move Ethan. Are you some kind of creep? Harassing a woman in broad daylight, right outside a university. Ethan frowned, his face dark. Who are you? He hadn't forgotten hearing Jeremy call me Sister Bella, so he looked at me. You know him? I ignored him and just told him to let go. The three of us struggling together was drawing a crowd. Just as we were at a standstill, a large hand gripped Ethan's wrist. I looked up and saw it was Jeremy's uncle, Julian. He was wearing a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up slightly, revealing strong, powerful forearms. The force of his grip made the veins on his arms stand out. His voice was cold and commanding. Let go. Ethan's face contorted in pain, and he finally released me. Jeremy quickly pulled me behind him for protection. Even after hearing Ethan claim to be my husband, he didn't back down. Even if you're married, you should talk things out properly, not get physical. I corrected him, ex-husband. Ethan blurted out, I don't agree. I cut him off coldly, you already signed the papers. But you tricked me. Ethan was at a loss for words, unable to explain. He could only watch me anxiously from behind the two men. He didn't understand. Things were going so well. He was making more and more money. Why had it come to this? Was it all because of Linda that she wanted a divorce? I was getting impatient and wanted him to leave. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Julian looking at me, his gaze dark and unreadable. He didn't look away when he saw me looking. His intense eyes were like pools of deep, swirling ink. My heart suddenly skipped a beat. In the end, Ethan left unwillingly. Once he was gone, I thanked Julian and Jeremy. Let me treat you to dinner. No way, I owe you one, Jeremy insisted. When he saw I was about to refuse again, he pushed Julian forward. My uncle makes a lot of money. Let him treat us to a big meal. Ultimately, we went to one of the most famous Cantonese restaurants in the city. After dinner, the two of them walked me home, which left me feeling a bit overwhelmed. Before they left, Julian gave me a piece of paper with a number on it. If you need anything, you can call this number to find me. I looked at the number on the paper. It suddenly felt hot in my hand. But under his somewhat intense gaze, I took it. I thought a proud man like Ethan would have stormed back home in a huff after finding out I had initiated the divorce. I never expected him to show up at my door the next day. He looked a bit weathered, as if he'd been up all night. When he saw me, he only asked one thing. I was too worked up yesterday. I forgot to ask if you've been doing okay these past 6 months. You've never traveled so far from home before. My lips parted, but I ended up just lowering my eyes. No matter how bad it is, it's better than living at your family's house. At the He family home, I was busy from morning till night without a break. Like a wind-up top, constantly spinning. Not a single moment was my own. And I received no payment for my labor. But here, every bit of my work had a price tag. My efforts were recognized. Ethan's face turned deathly pale when he heard my words, as if he was about to cry. I didn't quite understand why he was reacting this way. What did he expect? Did he think I had been living a life of luxury at his house? To be honest, when I lived alone back in my village, all I had to do each day was feed the chickens and pigs. The house was never messy. A quick sweep of the yard was all it took. I didn't eat much. What I grew in my fields was enough to keep me full. Back then, the neighborhood elders all said that once I got married, I'd live a good life, a life of ease. I'd have a man to depend on. But in reality, after marrying into the He family, my life was worse than when I was single. I didn't want to dwell on the past anymore. I looked at him and said calmly, let's not torture each other anymore. Let's let each other go and not interfere in each other's lives. Ethan shook his head. He couldn't accept it. What about the children? We still have Henry and Hank. Your mother won't mistreat them. As for everything else, that's your responsibility as their father. I closed the door again and ignored him. Surprisingly, Ethan stayed. His plan to leave in 2 days was forgotten. I knew he was convinced I was just throwing a tantrum, just putting on a brave face. He thought that my life without him was all a forced smile. That if he just coaxed me enough, I would eventually soften and go home with him. So when he saw me sewing canvas bags myself, and then going out to sell them, his face was filled with shock. The school was about to go on break. To make one last big sale before the new year, I sewed a batch of bags day and night, and took them to the school to sell. After running around all day, I was exhausted and sat down on the curb to rest. A bottle of hot juice was handed to me. It was Ethan. He looked at me with a complicated expression. I didn't take it. I pulled out my own water bottle and took a sip. The water was a bit cool, but it felt solid and real. Ethan sat down next to me. After a long pause, he couldn't help but say, "Why do you have to suffer like this? Just come home. Isn't it better if I take care of you?" I scoffed and pulled out a roasted sweet potato, slowly peeling the skin. The feeling of holding your hand out, asking people for money, I don't want to experience that ever again. Ethan's face darkened. He looked like he wanted to argue, but in the end he remained silent. On New Year's Eve, I was planning to make some dumplings for myself. I also bought some local specialty foods for the holiday. Just as I was about to start cooking, there was a knock on the door. I peeked through the crack in the door, and was surprised to see Julian outside. I opened the door puzzled. "Professor Jiang, what are you doing here?" Hadn't he gone home for the holiday? Neither he nor Jeremy were from here. Jeremy had gone home a week ago. I had assumed Julian had gone back with him. Julian lifted the bags in his hands and wiggled them. "Aren't you going to let me in first?" It was only then that I noticed his hands were full. I quickly stepped aside. "Please come in." I watched as he comfortably placed the groceries in the kitchen. I stood awkwardly to the side. I don't know if it was because of his high level of education or his cold personality, but even though we had met several times, I still felt more respect for him than familiarity. I just couldn't speak to him as freely as I did with Jeremy. After he took everything out of the bags, I saw that he had brought a lot of seafood. "Professor Jiang, what is all this?" "You always call me Professor Jiang. Do we have to be so formal?" He had a faint, almost invisible smile on his face as he glanced at me. I suddenly felt nervous. What else was I supposed to call him? By age, I should call him brother. But he was Jeremy's elder, so wouldn't that make me Jeremy's senior too? But I couldn't possibly call him uncle like Jeremy did. I was in a bit of a bind. Fortunately, Julian didn't let me struggle for long. "Don't worry about the generational stuff. Just a normal address is fine." I let out a long sigh of relief. "Julian." By this time, Julian had already taken off his coat and watch, setting them aside. As he started cleaning the shrimp, he explained, "I had some last-minute business this year and couldn't go home. When my family found out, they insisted I bring you some things as a formal thank you." So his family knew that I had saved Jeremy. Jeremy was the only son in the family, and everyone doted on him. Since I had saved him, they were naturally grateful to me. When they heard I was spending the new year alone in Guangzhou, they were worried I wouldn't eat well, so they had Julian bring me some food. Seeing I was about to refuse, Julian said, "It's all stuff the university gave out, so don't say no. Besides, I'll be eating it too." I paused for a moment before I understood. He was planning on spending New Year's Eve here too. Seeing my stunned expression, he raised an eyebrow. "What? You're not happy to have someone to celebrate with?" He had brought so many things and was even going to prepare it himself. How could I refuse? So I had to agree. Besides, having another person around for the new year would definitely make it livelier. I felt bad watching him work alone, so I went back to preparing the dumpling filling. Neither of us was very talkative, so we worked in comfortable silence. When I looked up, my gaze involuntarily fell on Julian. He had a habit of pressing his lips into a thin line, which made him look a bit serious. This was the first time I had ever really looked at him so closely. I realized he had a high-bridged nose and handsome features. He was tall and slender. He wasn't frail like Jeremy, but not overly muscular to the point of being intimidating. He was refined and gentlemanly, but with a contrasting arrogance and coolness. He had a unique charisma that was incredibly attractive, Yet the coldness in his eyes made people keep their distance. A phrase suddenly popped into my head. To be admired from a distance, but not to be trifled with. It was a line of poetry I had once heard from my children. It seemed to fit him perfectly. As I was lost in thought, he suddenly looked up at me. I felt a pang of guilt and immediately looked down. Caught red-handed staring at him, my face flushed. I vaguely thought I heard him chuckle. I was even more embarrassed, wishing I could find a hole to crawl into. He seemed to understand my predicament and took the initiative to break the silence. What are your plans for after the new year? Are you going back to the factory or starting your own business? I didn't hesitate. Starting my own business. That was my goal when I first came to Guangzhou. Working at the clothing factory was just because I was in a new place and had no capital. Now that I knew the city a little better and had saved some money, it was time to start planning. Julian nodded in approval. Good. The entrepreneurial spirit is strong right now. You're so smart, you'll definitely be able to seize the opportunity. I was stunned and stared at him blankly. This was the first time anyone had ever called me smart. And it was coming from a university professor who had studied abroad. I was incredibly flattered. Just as I was about to say something, there was another knock on the door. I was puzzled. Who else would be visiting on New Year's Eve? Bella, it's me. I was surprised to hear the voice from outside. Ethan? Hadn't he already gone home? I couldn't help but glance at Julian. His face was expressionless, but I somehow felt that he wasn't in a great mood. After a moment's hesitation, I explained, I think it's my ex-husband. Julian continued to clean the crabs, looking completely unfazed. He even managed a small smile. Did you two plan to spend the new year together? In that case, I must be intruding. I quickly denied it. No, we're divorced. Why would we plan to spend the new year together? I thought he had already left. The knocking continued, so I had no choice but to open the door. When I opened it, there stood Ethan, also carrying bags of groceries. I really didn't want him to come in, so I blocked the doorway. What are you doing here? He smiled. How could I let you spend New Year's Eve all alone? I've bought everything. He tried to come inside. I shifted to block him. That's not necessary. We're divorced, it's better to keep our distance. Ethan looked hurt. No matter what, we were family for so many years. On a day for family reunion. Why must you be all alone? Don't be. Before he could finish, Julian's voice came from inside. Bella, did you buy any chili peppers? I answered automatically, yes, they're in the vegetable basket. When I turned back to Ethan, I saw his face had turned ashen. You're hiding a man in your house. He gritted his teeth, looking like a husband who had just caught his wife cheating. I looked at him bewildered. Don't be so crude. What do you mean hiding a man? We're perfectly open about it. Ethan seemed to have lost his senses and insisted on coming in. Hey you. He managed to squeeze past me. I had no choice but to close the door and go back inside. Now the two men in the room were in a silent standoff. Or rather, it was a one-sided declaration of war from Ethan, because Julian was calmly cooking in the kitchen. He wore a beige apron and looked as comfortable as if he were the man of the house. When he saw Ethan, he merely flicked his eyes up for a second. I rushed over and stood in front of Ethan. You need to take your things and leave. Now. Julian was a scholar, an intellectual, and always a bit particular. I was afraid Ethan would offend him, so I was anxious to get him out. But my words only fueled Ethan's jealousy. He looked at me in disbelief. You're kicking me out for another man? I was speechless. As we were at a standstill, Julian spoke up. Bella, since he's also alone, let him join us. You two knew each other, after all. Hearing him say that, although I was still reluctant, I didn't want Julian to see any more of this farce, so I agreed. I said to Ethan, fine, you can stay. Ethan was fuming. From his perspective, I wouldn't let him stay for New Year's even after all his pleading. But as soon as Julian spoke, I agreed. It seemed like I cared more about Julian. And he wasn't wrong. I was divorced from Ethan, so I didn't have to care about him anymore. But Julian was different. I respected him. I didn't want to make things difficult for him, so whatever he said went. And so New Year's Eve became a party of 3. I went back to the kitchen and said to Ethan, You were always the master of the house who never lifted a finger, but this isn't your house. If you can't help, then you're not welcome here. I no longer felt the need to give him any face for the sake of our past. This was my house, and I made the rules. The moment I said this house doesn't support idlers, before Ethan could even speak, Julian let out a small laugh. Well, I'm certainly glad I know how to cook, or I'd be getting kicked out. I quickly explained no, I would never kick you out. Julian had brought so much expensive seafood and other delicacies. Of course, I couldn't possibly kick him out. Ethan looked like he was about to cough up blood. Did that mean the rule only applied to him? Facing Ethan's silent accusation, I calmly admitted it. Yes, it only applied to him. Although Ethan was angry, he eventually came into the kitchen and started washing vegetables. He subtly started asking questions and finally learned why Julian was there. After that, he seemed to look a little better. I also asked him curiously, "Why didn't you go back home? You're here. How could I possibly leave you all alone?" I snorted. "As if you've never left me alone before. When did I ever?" Ethan retorted, unconvinced. Thinking about the past, I couldn't help but feel it was all for nothing. I was all alone in his house, serving his parents, his sister-in-law, his nephew, and our children. He was gone for most of the year. In his eyes, his family was probably keeping me company. But in reality, I was the one serving his entire family. After all, I was an orphan before. But I would rather go back to being alone. I fell silent. Perhaps seeing my gloomy expression, Ethan frowned. After a pause, he said, "In the past, even though I was always away on business, the house was full of people. With them there to keep you company, you weren't so lonely." I really couldn't listen to him twist the truth and rewrite history any longer. What a load of crap. Be clear, who was taking care of whom? I was always the one taking care of them. I did all the housework. I took care of them when they were sick. What did they ever do for me? Julian immediately chimed in. Having to serve an entire family, I'm sure there was no time to be lonely. His one sentence instantly dissipated much of my anger, and I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. It was true. I was busier than a beast of burden. Where would I find the time to be lonely? I didn't expect Julian's words to be so sharp. Ethan clearly hadn't expected me to have so many complaints. He tried to explain, I didn't mean anything by it. All right, that's enough. What a downer. I didn't want to talk to him anymore. Overall, the New Year's Eve dinner was pretty good. At least the food was plentiful. And Ethan didn't say anything else to make people angry for the rest of the meal. After the New Year, Ethan still didn't leave. It seemed like he was planning on staying for good. May also came back soon. She was surprised to see Ethan. She knew all about what had happened between us, so she naturally didn't have a good attitude towards him. May didn't go back to the factory either. Instead, she joined me in starting the business. It was perfect, as I couldn't handle everything by myself anyway. Our business slowly got on the right track. We rented a stall and specialized in selling bags. Ethan's business also seemed to have shifted here. He would hang around me from time to time, but I couldn't be bothered to pay him any attention. One day, as May and I were closing up the stall, we saw Ethan standing with a young woman in the distance. As we got closer, we realized the young woman was Linda. Her expression was resentful, and her eyes were red and puffy. It looked like she had been crying. But when she saw me, her expression instantly changed to shock. "Bella, what are you doing here?" Linda walked towards me in disbelief, looking me up and down. Then, a flash of envy and hatred appeared in her eyes. She turned to Ethan, her tone accusatory. "Is this why you won't come home?" She spoke as if she were a wife who had caught her husband cheating, questioning him with righteous indignation. She was so sure of her position. Ethan probably hadn't told his family about my situation, so he didn't know how to explain. Linda looked deeply hurt. She bit her lip and turned to me. "You divorced him just like that, with such a cold heart. Now what are you doing, stringing him along? Are you hoping to get back together?" My expression hardened. "Have you successfully taken my place? Are you questioning me as Ethan's wife? If not, you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Ethan understood the implication in her words, and his face darkened. He said to Linda, "Sister-in-law, I don't need to explain this to you. I've already spoken to Mom and Dad. I had no patience for this drama and turned to leave. Seeing I was about to go, Ethan quickly stopped me to explain. I don't know how she found me. I didn't ask her to come. I brushed his hand away without ceremony. I don't want to know about your affairs. I just want you and your family to stay far away from me and stop bothering me. Ethan looked at me helplessly. Bella. May snorted defiantly and pulled me away to go home. The next day, Linda somehow found my stall. Her eyes were a mixture of envy and disdain. You don't really think you can just mess around and make a fortune like Ethan, do you? Having lived a second life, I could see right through Linda's petty thoughts. They were written all over her face. I knew she must think that Ethan was still paying for my expenses. That's why she was so jealous and resentful. Because before the new year, Ethan had given me a bank book. It contained all the money he had earned the previous year. He said that from now on, all the money he earned, except for necessary expenses for his parents and children back home, would be deposited into this bank book, which was in my name. He was afraid I wouldn't believe him, and to avoid any misunderstandings about him secretly giving money to Linda, he even started keeping accounts. He recorded every penny he earned and spent. Although I didn't ask for it, he insisted on depositing all the money into the bank book. He said the bank book belonged to me, he was just holding it for now. With this arrangement, Linda's spending was bound to be affected. Now that she lived in the city, surrounded by a world of consumption, the money she earned at the cafeteria was not nearly enough. In the past, Ethan would secretly supplement her income, and occasionally buy her expensive, fashionable things, allowing her to show off to her colleagues and neighbors. Now that Ethan wasn't home, she had no opportunity to ask him for things. Her in-laws were also very stingy and would never give her extra money. I figured this was why she had come all the way to Guangzhou. However, I had no intention of explaining anything to her. What she thought had nothing to do with me. I picked up a broom and started sweeping in front of her, kicking up dust all over her. Move it. Can't you see we're open for business? What are you doing blocking the entrance? Ahem ahem. Linda coughed and dodged the dust, glaring at me angrily. Finally, she stomped her foot and ran off. But to my surprise, she came back that evening with Ethan. May couldn't help but roll her eyes. She's like a ghost you can't shake off. Linda was about to snap back, but when she saw Ethan, she closed her mouth. She stood obediently behind him. Ethan was here to help me pick up a shipment. Today was the day the factory released the goods, and we had to go get them. The demand at our stall had grown. Even if May and I worked the sewing machines until they smoked, we couldn't keep up. So we found a factory and signed a contract for them to make our products. Today was the day to pick up the goods. Usually it was just me and May. Last time Jeremy happened to be visiting, so he helped us out. Our efficiency shot up. But today Jeremy had an exam and couldn't come. With just me and May, we'd probably have to make 2 or 3 trips back and forth. When Ethan found out, he immediately volunteered. He was even a little resentful. He complained about why I would bother an outsider when I needed help instead of asking him. He said that after all, we had been married for many years and didn't need to be such strangers. Thinking about what he owed me from the past, I didn't get hung up on it. Why not use free labor? So I agreed. Who knew that Linda would come along too? But it was fine that she came. I didn't care what her purpose was since she was here. No one was going to be idle. An extra person would make things faster, no matter what. So, I took them with me to the factory. Linda's eyes filled with envy as she looked at the factory, which was on a completely different scale from the ones back home. But soon, she had no energy to think about anything else. What are you standing there for? Get moving. I urged Linda on. She saw Ethan also moving back and forth, so she reluctantly moved a few things herself. Soon, she was exhausted. She tried to pull her old trick, saying she wasn't feeling well, and started panting heavily. I immediately said, Ethan, your sister-in-law is having another one of her episodes. You should hurry up and buy her a ticket home. As soon as Linda heard that, she stopped panting before Ethan could even look over. I knew it wasn't easy for Linda to make this trip, and she definitely wouldn't go back so easily. She saw the questioning look on Ethan's face and quickly said, It's nothing, I can handle it. With that, she immediately picked up a large bag and walked towards the tricycle. I watched this scene and smiled. After the first trip, I had May and Ethan take the load back while I stayed with Linda to continue moving things. After a while, Linda and I sat on the steps to rest. Linda hadn't done this kind of physical labor in a long time and was panting heavily. She glared at me. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" "Yes, I am." "So what? Go complain to Ethan." My nonchalant attitude angered Linda even more. She was about to say something else when a figure appeared in front of me. I thought it was May and the others coming back. I was about to get up when I looked up and saw someone unexpected. "Julian? What are you doing here?" I stood up, surprised to see him. He seemed to have rushed over, as he was still a bit out of breath. "I heard from Jeremy that today was your restocking day. He couldn't make it and I happened to be free." I was incredibly embarrassed. "No, we can handle it ourselves. Besides, you're a scholar. You can't be doing this kind of manual labor. It's dirty and tiring. You'll get your clothes all messy." As soon as I said that, I saw Ethan appear behind me with a dark expression on his face. He must have heard what I said. He probably thought that if he could do this kind of labor, why was I so concerned about Julian? But Julian really was different. He was an intellectual who had studied abroad, and besides, how could I trouble him? Jeremy was one thing in my eyes, he was just a kid. And he always felt like I was his savior, and was always looking for ways to help me. If he helped me, I could just treat him to a meal. But if Julian helped me, I wouldn't even know how to repay him. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, hoisted 2 large bags onto his shoulder at once, and loaded them onto the tricycle. He shot a defiant look at Julian. "Right, Professor Jiang is too delicate for this kind of work. Better not get in the way." I was about to retort. Ethan's words were just too nasty, but Julian placed a hand on my arm. He ignored Ethan's provocation and just gave me a small smile. "I'm already here. Just let me do my part." With him saying that, I couldn't refuse anymore. So we had one more person helping to move the goods. Linda tried to speak up several times in the middle of it all, but she was always cut off. I saw her secretly glancing at Julian the whole time. I knew that nothing good would come out of her mouth, and I didn't want to sully Julian's ears, so I just didn't give her a chance to speak. Many hands make light work, and we finished loading everything quickly. Back at my place, everyone washed their hands and cleaned up. I handed Julian a new towel. Julian took it with a smile. "Thank you. I should be the one thanking you." Julian didn't look like someone who did manual labor, but he was surprisingly strong, carrying the goods without even getting out of breath. He was a huge help today. After using the towel, he washed it himself and hung it back on the line to dry. "From now on, if you need help, you can call me. For anything." He stared at me intently as he said this. My heart fluttered, and I nodded randomly. Ethan happened to come into the yard just then. Seeing me and Julian together, he squeezed in between us. I didn't linger and went back to my room. May and I decided to make dinner as a small token of our gratitude. Everyone stayed. Julian, familiar with the layout, came into the kitchen to help. Not to be outdone, Ethan joined in as well. Seeing that everyone was in the kitchen, Linda had no choice but to help out too. The meal was ready quickly. Julian showed no curiosity at all about the sudden appearance of Linda. Linda, on the other hand, couldn't keep her mouth shut even while eating, always trying to ask questions. "Is this gentleman a scholar? Did you go to university?" May snorted. "Professor Jiang studied abroad. He's a university professor now." Linda's eyes lit up, and she exclaimed, "Professor Jiang, you're so amazing. This is my first time talking to someone who's been abroad." She glanced at me and then added, "Then it must be difficult for you and sister-in-law. Oh, I mean you and Sister Bella to communicate. Sister Bella didn't even finish elementary school. You two definitely have nothing in common." May knew she was up to no good, bringing up my lack of schooling and deliberately mentioning my past marriage to Ethan, as if to make sure Julian knew everything. She was so angry she was about to argue back, but Julian suddenly spoke up. Communication between people has never been about education or about their past. What matters is the person themselves. His tone was calm, but it carried a strange, gentle power that completely calmed my heart. I looked at him. As it happened, he was looking at me too. His gaze was so intense it felt hot, and I quickly lowered my head and continued eating. After dinner, I saw them all out. Lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Julian. I wasn't an inexperienced young girl. I could naturally sense Julian's special feelings for me. But at this moment, I didn't have the time or energy for romance. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about it anymore. Forget it. Since I can't reciprocate, I shouldn't lead him on. I'll just try to avoid him from now on. But I never expected that even though I tried my best to avoid Julian, and even stopped seeing Jeremy as much, Julian would start showing up more and more frequently. As our sales grew, I shared my plan with May. I wanted to create our own brand. Not just selling from a stall, but getting into department stores and slowly building a name for ourselves. May, of course, had no objections. I'll follow your lead. So I immediately started the process of registering the brand and handling all the related matters. Finally, on an auspicious day, my brand was officially established. Once we were in the department stores, we no longer just sold canvas tote bags. Our product line grew more and more diverse. On opening day, Julian, Ethan, and Jeremy all came. They insisted on coming, and I couldn't very well stop them. After all, it was a grand opening, and having more people around would help out and make it more festive. The atmosphere between Ethan and Julian was tense, almost anyone could feel it. I opened my mouth to say something, but in the end, I just pretended not to see anything. The first day of business was much better than I expected, with a constant stream of customers. After a long day of work, that evening May suggested we go to her place for hot pot. Everyone happily agreed. Just as we finished preparing, Linda suddenly appeared. She looked at Ethan with teary eyes. "Brother, you said you had something important to do today and left me home alone. Was it just to come to Bella's place?" Linda saw the happy, harmonious scene in the courtyard and was completely shattered. She demanded, "Brother, just come home with me. You've been gone for over a year. We all miss you so much." Ethan subconsciously glanced at me. Seeing my blank expression, he immediately said to Linda, "You go back first. Don't make a scene here." Linda, of course, refused. Ethan was getting a headache and was about to try and persuade her again when Jeremy suddenly spoke up. "Who is this lady anyway? I wanted to ask last time. Is she Mr. He's new wife?" As soon as he said it, Linda's face turned beet red, and she looked shyly at Ethan. Ethan's face, however, darkened, and he glared at Jeremy. "Don't talk nonsense. This is my sister-in-law." Jeremy was not one to back down. "What nonsense am I talking? The way she's acting, anyone would think you two are a couple. But you say she's just your sister-in-law? Don't tell me this is how you two always act. My God, that's just not right." Jeremy was young and couldn't hold his tongue. He just said whatever was on his mind. His words made both Ethan and Linda's faces change. May also added with schadenfreude, "That's not even the half of it." Before Ethan was even divorced, he gave the apartment in the city to his sister-in-law, leaving his wife and kids in the old house. He also wanted to give his wife's job opportunity to his sister-in-law. Basically, anything good went to her, while his own wife and kids had to eat scraps. Jeremy looked at me with sympathy, then glared at Ethan in solidarity. Ethan tried to explain, there were reasons for all of that. I just felt that as the older brother and sister-in-law, Bella and I should take extra care of her. May immediately retorted, "So you buy your good sister-in-law a watch and a cashmere coat, but you let your wife go without even a new set of clothes for the new year?" Jeremy was instantly shocked. "What? Who's married to whom here? If my dad ever dared to do even one of those things, my mom would divorce him in a heartbeat." He turned to look at me. "Sister Bella, good for you for divorcing him, but you really put up with too much. How could you only think of divorcing him after they ganged up on you like that for so long?" I smiled helplessly. The scary part was, in my past life, I never managed to get a divorce, not even until the day I died. Thank heavens I was given a second chance. Ethan looked at me with guilt-filled eyes. He wanted to take care of his sister-in-law, and in the end, it earned him a good reputation, but I was the one who suffered and was wronged. Seeing herself being attacked by everyone, Linda immediately fought back. She held back her sobs and wiped her tears. "I lost my husband years ago. My brother-in-law just took pity on me and looked after me a little more. Why do you have to make it sound so ugly?" She looked pointedly at me. Could it be that someone has been adding fuel to the fire, slandering me and my brother-in-law behind our backs? I swear to God, he's such a good person. Yet he's being dragged into this unfairly. May slammed the table and jumped up. Bah! What do you think you are? You don't need slandering. I'll say it to your faces, you and Ethan. Neither of you are good people, ganging up to bully Bella. Ethan, don't you pretend you don't know how much Bella has suffered all these years. I saw how angry May was and pulled her back down to her seat. I looked at Ethan, my expression cold. I've already said everything I need to say about the past. I don't want to repeat the hardships I went through, and I don't want to hear your excuses anymore. From now on, please don't you and Linda show up at my house again. You're not welcome here. Get out. Ethan's lips moved, wanting to say something. Seeing how rude I was being, Linda grabbed Ethan to leave. Brother, Bella has hooked up with another man now and doesn't want you anymore. If someone is willing to pick up sloppy seconds, then let him. My gaze turned icy. I stood up, walked towards her, and slapped her across the face. I hadn't wanted to bother with her, but she was really pushing it. Besides, her words were clearly aimed at Julian. Whatever was between me and Ethan, I didn't want Julian to suffer for it. Given his social standing, he probably wouldn't have had to hear such words if it weren't for me. Linda froze for a few seconds, her hand on her cheek. She probably never thought I would dare to hit her. Tears streamed down her face, and she raised her hand to strike back. Before I could dodge, Ethan quickly intervened, grabbing her wrist and pushing her aside. Linda looked at him in disbelief. Brother, you saw her. She hit me. Ethan's face was livid. You were out of line. You deserved to be hit. Brother. I didn't want to waste any more words on them. I threw them both out. And I warned them that if they ever dared to come near my yard again, I would hit them both without hesitation. Ethan stood at the door, looking at me in pain. I'm sorry. I slammed the door shut with a cold face. When I turned around, I saw everyone looking at me with complicated expressions. I chuckled. Sorry about that. I ruined your appetite. I returned to my seat and motioned for everyone to continue eating. Julian didn't say anything comforting, but he silently placed a piece of the fish I liked into my bowl. I quietly said thank you. After dinner, I walked them to the gate. Julian looked at me, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. I avoided his gaze and said goodbye. For a long time after that, Julian still appeared from time to time. He would always silently help me with things, never making me feel burdened, but always quietly making his presence known. If I said I felt bad about it, he would look at me innocently. If you feel bad, you can invite me over for dinner. It was just one meal, so of course I wouldn't refuse. And so he started coming to my house more and more often. He handled the situation with perfect tact, slowly and unknowingly becoming a part of my life. As for Ethan, after that unpleasant parting, he disappeared for a long time. He reappeared half a month later. He looked a bit weathered, dusty from travel. He told me that he had sent Linda back to our hometown, and that she wouldn't bother me anymore. Those things Jeremy said last time, I've really been thinking about them for a long time. I never thought that my care for Linda would seem so strange and excessive to outsiders. I'm sorry. His face was grave and sorrowful. He said he truly regretted it. I've brought Henry, Hank, and my parents to the city. They're all living in that apartment now. I raised an eyebrow slightly. That was a bit of a surprise. The apartment wasn't large. Although it had 2 bedrooms, it was only about 500 square feet. With 3 adults and 3 children living there now, I couldn't imagine how crowded it must be. Then Ethan continued, but for now Henry and Hank can only go to the school for migrant kids. I'll figure something out later to get them into Teddy's school. At the mention of the 2 children, I felt no ripple of emotion. It wasn't easy to get into a good school in the city back then. There was a decent elementary school near the apartment building, but spots were limited, and Teddy had already taken one, so of course Henry and Hank couldn't go. The school for migrant kids, although in the city, was poorly managed and the teaching quality was bad. Those 2 kids had no self-control to begin with, and the 2 old folks spoiled them rotten. I wondered if they would even be able to finish their compulsory education. But that wasn't my concern anymore. In my past life, I had done everything I possibly could for them. Seeing me silent, Ethan wanted to say more, but I cut him off coldly. All right, I've told you not to bother me anymore. With that, I went back into my shop. As the business grew, I started thinking about buying a small factory. After all, with our large volume of orders, having our own factory would be much more convenient. Soon, I found a clothing factory that was about to go out of business. The factory wasn't too big, and it had existing machinery and workers. It was a perfect fit for my needs. I bought it quickly. Business was booming, and by the end of the year, we opened our third store. One day, May and I were in the store, and she suddenly nudged my arm. I looked at her quizzically, and she tilted her chin, gesturing for me to look outside. The staff was moving goods, and Ethan was quietly helping in the line. Because I had told him to stay out of my sight, he didn't dare come near me, just helped out silently. May found it amusing. I hear his business is pretty busy too. It's a wonder he still has time to come here and try to win you over. She hesitated for a moment, then looked at me. Seriously, Bella, is there any chance you and Ethan will get back together? He's really changed a lot. I answered without a moment's hesitation. No chance. I glanced at Ethan, who was still moving boxes, and scoffed. Men are like that sometimes. They're always nice to outsiders. If I got back together with him, I'd probably just become like old rice and he'd be like a blood-sucking mosquito again. May thought about it and agreed. Then she asked, what about Professor Jiang? The pen in my hand paused. Don't talk nonsense. Professor Jiang is just a nice person. May giggled and looked at me teasingly. Professor Jiang has made it pretty obvious. You can't just pretend you don't see it. Faced with her teasing, my face flushed slightly, and I went back to my accounting in silence. After we closed the shop, Ethan watched me from a distance. He knew I didn't want to see him. After a moment of silence, he was about to leave when a woman with 2 children suddenly walked towards him. Linda had actually brought Henry and Hank to Guangzhou. When the 2 boys saw me, after an initial moment of shock, they both ran to me. They hugged my legs and cried. Ethan was also completely surprised. After everyone had calmed down, I learned that Linda had truly reached her breaking point and had no choice but to bring the 2 boys here. That apartment building had become Linda's nightmare. Every day she went back, it was filled with the clamor of children, giving her a headache. She worked long hours at the cafeteria back in town, which was already tiring enough. After work, she had to take care of 3 children and 2 elderly people. The room had become cramped and cluttered, with no space to move. More importantly, as Henry and Hank got older, they started to realize the difference between their school and Teddy's. Their school was dilapidated and far away. Teddy's school, on the other hand, was a new campus and very beautiful. It was only then that they remembered what I had once said. They realized that Teddy had stolen their chance to go to a good school. They threw tantrums, demanding to go to Teddy's school, or else they wouldn't let Teddy go either. The 2 boys had been spoiled rotten by their grandparents, and when they started acting up, no one could control them. Teddy couldn't even do his homework in peace when he came home. After listening to Linda's complaints, I took a closer look at her. Compared to the last time I saw her, she did look much older now. She was no longer wearing fashionable clothes, probably because she didn't have the extra money or time to dress up. Linda looked at me with pure malice. I knew she probably hated me for previously turning Henry and Hank against her and her son. She finally couldn't hold it in any longer. You're here in Guangzhou living the high life, all dressed up, while I have to raise your 2 kids for you. How is that fair? I corrected her. Regarding the children, Ethan and I have already come to an agreement. The children are to stay with the He family, to be raised by him. If I remember correctly, he sends money back every month, more than enough to raise 2 children. So, you're not raising them for me, you're raising them for your brother-in-law. After the divorce, I had told Ethan that if he thought it was unfair for him to raise the children alone, we could each take one. But I knew very well that the children's grandparents would never let me take them. In their eyes, the boys were He family blood, and they would never let them go with me. So Ethan and I had signed an agreement at that time, clearly defining our responsibilities. Both children belonged to him, and he was solely responsible for their upbringing. After a pause, I curled my lip into a sarcastic smile. Besides, your brother-in-law helped raise your child for all those years. Now you've only been helping him for a short time, and you can't take it anymore? Linda was shocked and quickly denied it. I'm not, it's just that the children miss their mother, so I brought them here to see you. I glanced at the two boys, my face expressionless. The children miss me? I highly doubt it. When the two boys first saw me, they hugged me and cried. They looked sad, but their mouths were full of complaints. One moment they were bad-mouthing Linda, the next it was Teddy. They wanted me to step in and get Teddy kicked out of his school. I knew they only needed me now, they didn't actually miss me. Perhaps Linda had told the children's grandparents that I was doing business here and had made money. The grandparents had probably instructed the two boys. So as soon as they calmed down, they started asking for money. Mom, we're your sons, you can't be heartless. Yeah, you have to give us all the money you've earned. Otherwise, when you're old, we won't take care of you. We'll just leave you on the street. The two boys got more and more out of line. With that familiar way of speaking, it was obvious that Ethan's parents had put them up to it. Hearing this, Ethan got so angry he stood up and slapped each of them. Shut up. That's your mother. Who gave you permission to threaten her like that? The two boys were defiant. Grandma and Grandpa said so. If she doesn't give us all the money, we'll throw her out when she gets old. Ethan spanked them so hard they howled in pain. The scene became a chaotic mess. I found it all rather boring and felt no sadness. I already knew what these two children were like. I stopped paying attention to their family drama and got up to leave. I didn't bother with the He family's affairs after that. The factory had just been taken over, and I had a lot to do. One day, Ethan came to find me. He looked much older. That surprised me a little. In my past life, even in his middle age, he was still dapper and charming. Now it seemed things had really changed. He looked at me, speechless for a long time. Seeing I was about to leave, he finally had to speak. I'll send the two kids back tomorrow. What they said the other day, I'm sorry. Perhaps hearing firsthand what his parents had been teaching the children was a huge shock to him as well. I just smiled nonchalantly. No need to apologize. We hadn't spoken for long before Linda rushed over. She looked at me with wary, venomous eyes. Even a vicious tiger won't eat its own cubs. How can you be so cruel as to not even give your own sons money? I knew this was her main goal. To get money. As for whether the money would actually be used for the two children, I thought that was highly unlikely. Her accusations didn't hurt me in the slightest. In fact, it was Ethan who couldn't take it anymore. That's enough. I'll raise the boys. That's what we agreed on, and it's not like I can't afford it. Our family business is none of your concern. Linda looked hurt, but had to hold back her words. Just then, the owner of the shop next door came over with a delivery and called for me to take a look. Didn't you want a scarf? We finally got some in stock. The shop next door was a foreign brand that sold all kinds of hats and scarves. I had seen a scarf I liked in a magazine, but it had been out of stock. Hearing it was available, I immediately went over with her. After I paid, I saw Linda had followed me. Her eyes lit up as she looked at the scarves on the shelf. Seeing me pay so readily, her eyes filled with jealousy. Turning around, she saw Ethan and immediately became submissive. Brother, my birthday is coming up. Could you buy me a scarf? To save money, I don't even take the bus to work anymore. I ride my bike back to town every day, shivering in the cold. I'm always freezing. Usually, when she played the victim like this, Ethan would give in. Although he hadn't been as generous with her lately, Linda figured it was because she hadn't been around. So now she was full of confidence, her eyes scanning the shelves. She was probably already deciding which one to buy. Unfortunately for her, Ethan didn't play along. Because Ethan said his money was with me, and he had none. Linda immediately blew up, repeating in disbelief, Brother, your money is with Bella? Are you crazy? You two are already divorced. Ethan hated it when people brought up the divorce, so his face instantly turned cold. I owe her this. I'm willingly giving her all my money. Linda was about to cause a scene. I was getting tired of listening from the side. Ethan, if you two want to flirt, do it outside. Don't disturb other people's business here. And besides, it doesn't matter who you give your money to. Don't blame it on me. I never said I wanted your money. After that unpleasant scene, Ethan disappeared for a while. He took Linda and the 2 children back home, then returned alone. He was determined to stay in Guangzhou. Even though I told him there was no chance of us getting back together, he insisted on staying. His business wasn't really suited for this area. But that was his business, and if he insisted on staying, I certainly wasn't going to meddle. Another year passed, and our business grew even larger. In the new year, our brand finally expanded to other provinces, with stores opening up all over the country. In just a few years, our brand name had become well known. May also found the love of her life, and they got married. We bought houses in the same villa community and continued to be neighbors. But I didn't expect Julian to move in as well. This made seeing each other even more convenient. He would often come over to my house to cook for me, using the excuse that I was too busy with work and wasn't eating properly. Both Julian and I attended May's wedding. After the wedding, Julian and I strolled along a small path on a summer evening. There were a lot of mosquitoes this season, and I was the type who always attracted them. And today, I had forgotten to bring my insect repellent. Just as I was thinking about it, Julian took a small bottle out of his pocket. Here. He handed it to me. I stared at the bottle of insect repellent in my hand, stunned for a moment. He smiled slightly. You're already prone to mosquito bites, and you always forget to bring repellent. The mosquitoes that follow you never have to worry about a meal. I couldn't help but laugh. I applied the repellent to my exposed arms and neck, a faint, cool sensation spreading over my skin. It seemed like for a long time now, Julian had always remembered my little habits. And when I got busy and forgot, he would silently have everything prepared. His kindness towards me was always so subtle and gentle. I smiled and handed the bottle back to him. Julian didn't take it. You keep it. I don't really use it anyway. I insisted on giving it to him. You keep it. When I need it, I'll ask you for it. Julian looked at me, surprised, not quite understanding. He was stunned for a moment, then his eyes suddenly lit up. I said deliberately, "What? You're not willing to hold it for me?" "I am." Julian blurted out. His eyes were filled with joy he couldn't suppress. "I am willing." My willingness to leave something I often used with him, to ask him for it any time, was a silent permission for him to always be by my side. Julian understood, and that's why he was so excited. I smiled and continued walking forward. He caught up and walked by my side. The hand closest to me trembled slightly. After an initial hesitation, he saw that I didn't resist. He firmly took my hand. After a long silence, he suddenly said, "Bella." He chuckled softly and couldn't help but call my name again. "Bella, I really like you. Bella, right now, I must be the happiest person in the world." My cheeks grew hot, and I couldn't help but say, "You're not a kid anymore. Stop being so cheesy." I never thought that the cool and serious Professor Jiang could have such a moment. But I had to admit, I liked hearing it. I squeezed his hand in return. The moonlight stretched our intertwined shadows. The happy, blissful moment vanished when we saw Ethan outside the community gate. Ethan's initially calm expression instantly darkened when he saw my hand in Julian's. I made no move to hide it. Julian and I were both single. We were free to be in a relationship without reporting to anyone. But I never expected Ethan to resort to violence. Ethan's face was dark as he approached. The next moment, his fist flew straight into Julian's face. Julian immediately fought back. I was so shocked I almost screamed, "Ethan, what are you doing?" I tried to pull them apart, but they were locked in a fierce fight. Julian might look like a scholar, but he was no pushover. Soon, Ethan was knocked to the ground. After taking a few punches, Ethan managed to get on top of Julian. Seeing Ethan's fist about to land on Julian's face again, I rushed forward and shoved Ethan off. Caught off guard, he fell to the ground. I quickly helped Julian up, extremely worried. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. A little scratch like this is nothing." Julian was still smiling warmly, but I felt terrible. Seeing the bruise on the corner of his mouth, I turned to Ethan, my eyes blazing with anger. Ethan stood up. But the next second, I walked up to him and slapped him hard across the face. As he stared at me in disbelief, I slapped him again. "The first slap is because you had no right to hit Julian. You're not worthy. The second slap is for everything you owe me from all these years." Being harassed by you for years after the divorce, seeing your so-called remorse just makes me sick. From now on, please don't ever appear in front of me and Julian again." My unprecedented anger and coldness left Ethan stunned for a long time. His face was black and blue, and he didn't even notice the blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. He just stood there, motionless. Julian walked to my side and put his arm around my shoulders. Ethan's eyes turned red. He opened his mouth. "Bella, I'm sorry. All these years, it's all been my fault. That's enough. It's pointless to say these things now. You should go. If what happened today happens again, I will call the police." After that warning, I took Julian's hand and walked into the community. Long after we were gone, Ethan was still standing in the same spot. Back at home, I got out the first aid kit and carefully tended to Julian's wounds. He didn't show any sign of pain, but my heart ached for him. "I'm sorry." He quickly covered my mouth. "Between us, we don't say that." His hand moved to cup my face, his thumb stroking my cheek gently. His tone was light. "A few punches are worth it if it means he won't bother you anymore." Seeing that he was still in the mood to joke, the weight in my heart finally lifted a little. I took his hand in mine. From that day on, Ethan finally disappeared from my life. May also found out about me and Julian. I knew it. The first time I met Julian, the way he looked at you, and the way you avoided him, I knew you two had feelings for each other. I was a little surprised. I hadn't realized my feelings for Julian were so obvious. Perhaps I had been drawn to him from the very beginning. But at that time, I had too many worries and subconsciously pushed him away. I never thought that after all these years, we would still end up together. Jeremy also found out about me and Julian. He was shocked when he first heard the news. He was a bit clueless when it came to romance and had completely missed the unusual atmosphere between me and Julian. He was very happy, but also a little conflicted. "If you're with my uncle, does that mean I can't call you Sister Bella anymore? Otherwise, the family hierarchy would be all messed up." He sighed. "Man, that's going to be weird to get used to." I smiled. "Call me whatever you want. There's no rush to change. After calling me Sister Bella for so many years, it would probably be hard to change overnight. It was just a title, anyway. I didn't really care." But Julian cleared his throat, his gaze towards Jeremy carrying a hint of a threat. Jeremy immediately changed his tune. "Auntie." The way his face changed so quickly made me and Julian look at each other and smile. In the fall, Julian and I had our wedding. The ceremony was held in Guangzhou, and almost all of Julian's family came. They were all easygoing and well-educated people, a close and loving family. It was the kind of family atmosphere I had always dreamed of. At the wedding, I received an unexpected gift. It was a bank book from Ethan. All the money he had earned over the years was in it. He said it was both compensation for me and a wedding gift. If I accepted it, the past would be wiped clean, and we would owe each other nothing. There would be no need to see each other again. In the end, I accepted it. As a final farewell to the past. Julian supported my decision. After we got married, Julian and I continued to live in Guangzhou. That same year, I decided to expand the brand overseas. Because we had a head start, our brand quickly became a leader in the casual luggage market. Slowly, we gained global recognition. Another year passed, and our daughter was in elementary school. Julian was now a dean at the university, so he taught less and had more time to spend with our daughter. Because my work was more demanding, he took on more of the family responsibilities. I was very grateful to him for this. He said I was a bird that soared freely. As long as I was willing to rest by his side when I was tired, even for a short while, he would be content. His devotion made me even more determined not to let him down. Whenever I wasn't traveling for work, I tried to be home as much as possible. Our little family of 3, even just quietly building blocks together, was a time of happiness. One winter, many years later, I saw Henry and Hank for the first time in a long time. They were grown men now, still unmarried. I knew why they were here. A few years ago, after the financial crisis, Ethan's business had plummeted, and he couldn't hold on. He had no choice but to leave Guangzhou and return to our hometown. Now, it seemed his 2 sons had squandered what little was left of the family fortune. So they had come to find me. I listened to their tearful complaints with boredom. Complaints about how they had been wronged all these years. Mom, I know you were wronged back then, so even though you didn't care about us all these years, we don't hate you. Mom, Aunt Linda was manipulative back then, and Dad was tricked by her. He did you wrong, we know that. You know. Back then, she played the victim and took the city apartment, which meant we couldn't go to a good school. We didn't get a good foundation, and that's why everything went wrong. Neither of the boys had managed to get into college. Ethan had sent them to a vocational school, hoping they would learn a trade, but they were too ambitious and ended up learning nothing. They had no patience for working with Ethan in his business, and only thought about eating, drinking, and having fun. Their words went in one ear and out the other. I knew from my past life that they only cared about money, not family. In my past life, Ethan was rich, and Linda, benefiting from his generosity, also had her own career. I was just a useless housewife. So they wanted me to die. In this life, Ethan went bankrupt. Linda, with no one to leech off of, eventually remarried. Unfortunately, she was older by then, had no good job, and couldn't find a very good match. I heard from May that she later got divorced again. She wanted to move back into the He family home, but the two old folks refused. They had been against her remarrying in the first place, and now that she was divorced and wanted to come back, there was no way. With nowhere else to go, Linda caused a scene at the He family home. In the end, Ethan's father had a stroke from the anger and became paralyzed, and his mother's face was distorted from a stroke. The family's arguments were endless, but in the end, Linda was still kicked out. Now the He family had fallen, with only that one dilapidated apartment building left, where several adults were all squeezed together. Henry and Hank wanted to get married, which naturally meant buying a new house. But they had no concept of saving money, spending whatever they had, so now they didn't have a penny to their names. And then they thought of me, their rich biological mother. I didn't say much, just showed them the custody agreement I had signed with Ethan. The agreement clearly stated that the two children would always belong to the He family, to be raised by them, and I had no responsibility whatsoever. I had lost my patience with them, and had someone throw them out. In fact, even though the agreement was clear, to avoid any future legal disputes, I had paid for their vocational school tuition. That way, even if they wanted to take legal action, I had fulfilled my parental support obligations before they came of age. And now all the assets under my name had long been transferred to my daughter. I wouldn't let them get a single cent. Besides, they were adults now. There was no problem with them supporting themselves. To avoid further trouble, I took the initiative to contact Ethan for the first time in over a decade. I told him about Henry and Hank. I hoped that they would all stop bothering us. Otherwise, I wouldn't be polite. My connection to those two children was long since severed. Ethan only said okay. After that, they never appeared again. Another 20 years passed. The signs of age were becoming more and more apparent on my and Julian's faces. Our daughter had grown up and was capable of standing on her own 2 feet. Once our daughter successfully took over my business, Julian and I both retired. We began our retired life of leisure and wealth. The end. Ethan's epilogue. Ethan, his hair white, lay in bed, listening to the curses from outside. Linda and her son Teddy were here to cause trouble again. At her age, she still had no place to live, so she had set her sights on this apartment again. Linda was screaming that half of this apartment was hers, so she had a right to live here. Henry and Hank, of course, refused. After the old He couple died, the house finally felt a bit more spacious. There was no way they were letting anyone else move in. Now they were just waiting for Ethan to die too. Then the house would be even roomier. Maybe then they could even find wives. After Linda was driven away, the two sons came to Ethan's bedside and couldn't stop cursing him. "You old fool. It's all your fault. This was our house, but you had to give it to that bitch, and now we've been stuck with her for all these years. You were so horny. You'd give away the house just to please that bitch, without a thought for our lives, leaving us in the countryside. It's all your fault. You were so busy licking that bitch's boots that you made Mom leave in sadness, and now she won't even acknowledge us." A decade ago, they had thought about looking for their biological mother, but Ethan had stopped them. Later, when he was paralyzed and couldn't stop them, their mother's social class was already completely different from theirs. It was hard for them to even see her once. Then someone warned them to behave themselves, or they would lose even what they had now. So they had scurried back home. Looking at Ethan lying in bed, they were filled with rage. It was all because this old lecher had ruined the family. Ethan wanted to defend himself. He didn't have any other feelings for Linda. He wasn't just some lecher. But he didn't have the strength to open his mouth, because he hadn't eaten in 2 days. And besides, he had no defense. It seemed like everyone thought he was in love with Linda. Finally, the two sons looked at him and said with cold malice, "Old man, just hurry up and die. It would be a kindness to us." After everyone had left, Ethan's consciousness grew dimmer. He knew his time was near. In a daze, he seemed to have returned to the past. From a third-person perspective, he watched all the wrongs Bella had suffered over the years. He suddenly realized that Bella and the children were right. He really had been that much of a bastard. His wife and children couldn't even afford a piece of meat. Yet he had bought Linda a watch that cost over $100. His wife had to walk to the fields to work for others. Yet he had given the bicycle to Linda. His sons were in a run-down classroom in the county, while Linda's child was in a bright and spacious city school. All of this was his own doing. But Bella hadn't divorced him. She had single-handedly brought the children to the city, ensuring they received a good education, and grew up to be sensible and well-behaved. His career also got better and better. Ethan thought this was a beautiful dream before death. But slowly, he realized something was wrong. As a middle-aged man, he was successful in his career and had a happy family, a virtuous wife, and successful sons. He was, by all accounts, a winner in life. And then he saw that scene. His sons, standing over a dying Bella on her sickbed, saying those vicious and hurtful words. Ethan screamed for them to shut up. But it was no use. Then Bella slowly closed her eyes. Ethan couldn't help but cry out. He seemed to understand why Bella had insisted on a divorce. Why she was so cold to the children. It was all his fault. He deserved 1,000 deaths. In this overwhelming regret, Ethan closed his eyes forever. The end.